The night my son-in-law punched me, I tasted blood before I even understood what had happened. One second, I was standing in my kitchen telling Ryan Bennett that I would never hand him control of my fortune. And the next, I was sprawled across the marble floor while my daughter stood frozen in the hallway, too shocked to move. Ryan leaned over me with hatred in his eyes and said, "That money should have been ours a long time ago." What he didn't know was that the moment he hit me, he destroyed his own life. Because I may have been 68 years old, but I was not the weak old widow he thought I was. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted like family, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. These stories remind us we're never truly alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe if emotional family dramas like this speak to your heart. Before Ryan Bennett turned my home into a battlefield, my life had been quiet in the kind of way that only comes after surviving great loss. I was 68 years old and living alone in Charleston, South Carolina, in the same waterfront home my late husband Walter and I had spent nearly 30 years building together. The house overlooked the marshlands, where tall grass bent with the wind every evening, like waves bowing to the sunset. Some mornings I would sit on the back porch with coffee in my hands and listen to the gulls while remembering Walter's laugh. People think grief softens with age. It doesn't. You simply learn how to carry it without collapsing. Walter had been gone for 8 years by then. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel. One day he was arguing with contractors over roofing materials, and 6 months later, I was holding his hand in a hospice room while machines breathed louder than he did. After he died, I buried myself in work because silence was unbearable. Walter and I had built a small real estate company from almost nothing. We started with one duplex when we were in our 30s. By the time he passed away, we owned rental properties across South Carolina and Georgia, along with several investment accounts and commercial buildings downtown. I could have sold everything. Instead, I expanded it, not because I was greedy, because work gave me purpose when my heart no longer did. Eventually, the business became stable enough that I no longer needed to manage every detail myself. I hired property managers, accountants, attorneys. My life settled into routine, morning walks, gardening, charity lunches, phone calls with my daughter Claire. For a while, I truly believed I had survived the hardest chapter of my life. I was wrong. Claire was my only child. She had always been gentle-hearted, even as a little girl. Sensitive, emotional. The kind of child who cried when birds hit windows or when stray dogs wandered near traffic. After Walter died, she worried constantly about me living alone. "Mom," she used to say, "you should move closer to us." But I loved my home too much to leave it. Claire lived about 40 minutes away with her husband Ryan and their son Noah. Ryan worked in finance when they first married. Confident, polished, charming. The kind of man who remembered waitresses' names and always brought wine to dinner. In the beginning, I adored him. I remember telling Evelyn Carter, my closest friend since college, that Claire had married a man who made her feel safe. God, I hate remembering that now. The first few years seemed happy enough. Ryan wore tailored suits, drove expensive cars, and talked about investments over dinner like he was born for success. Claire looked proud whenever he entered a room. Then things started changing. Slowly at first. So slowly that I kept dismissing my own instincts. Ryan lost his executive position at an investment firm after what he called corporate restructuring. That was the phrase he used over family dinner while carving chicken with tight, angry movements. "Just politics," he muttered. "Some people can't handle ambitious men." Claire tried to smile through it. I tried to believe him, but after that, something darker settled inside him. He became restless, irritable, sharp around the edges, and strangely interested in my finances. At first, it sounded harmless. "So, Janet," he asked one afternoon while standing in my kitchen, "have you ever thought about estate planning?" I looked up from slicing peaches. "I already have estate planning." He laughed lightly. "No, I mean long term. Trusts, protection." Making sure the wealth stays in the family. Wealth, not legacy, not security. Wealth. The word sat wrong with me immediately. Still, I brushed it aside. Older women are trained to ignore discomfort, especially with family. We convince ourselves we're overreacting because we don't want conflict. That was my first mistake. Over the next few months, Ryan's questions became more frequent. How many properties do you still own yourself? Who manages your accounts? What happens if you become sick unexpectedly? Wouldn't it be easier if Claire had access to everything now? Every conversation somehow drifted back to money. I started noticing Claire repeating his ideas almost word for word. You shouldn't stress over finances anymore, Mom. Ryan says older people become targets for scams. Maybe it's safer if someone younger helps manage things. Someone younger, meaning Ryan. One Sunday afternoon, they came over for lunch with Noah. I had spent the morning making shrimp and grits because Noah loved it. While Claire helped set the table, Ryan wandered through the house holding a glass of iced tea. At one point, I walked into my office and found him standing near my filing cabinet. He smiled too quickly. Oh, sorry. I was looking for the bathroom. The bathroom was in the opposite direction. I said nothing, but something cold moved through my chest. Later that evening, after they left, I checked the drawer where I kept some banking documents and property records. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but one folder had been shifted slightly sideways, just enough that I noticed. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I told myself not to be paranoid. That was my second mistake. A week later, Evelyn came by with lemon bars and gossip from church ladies the way she always did. We sat on my porch watching the water while the sun dropped low across the marsh. You know, she said carefully, I don't trust that son-in-law of yours. I nearly laughed. Evelyn, you don't trust anybody. No, she replied. I especially don't trust men who smile too much while asking old women questions about money. Her words unsettled me more than I wanted to admit, because deep down, I had already started feeling it too. The shift, the hunger behind Ryan's politeness. That night, I walked through my dark house checking locks that had never frightened me before. Before going to bed, I opened my office safe and looked through the important documents inside. Property deeds, investment statements, Walter's handwritten letters, my will. Everything seemed untouched. And yet, as I closed the folder containing my legal paperwork, I noticed something strange. A photocopy of my signature page was missing. I froze. At first, I thought maybe Daniel Brooks, my attorney, had taken it during our last meeting. But Daniel always informed me before removing anything. I searched the safe again, then the desk drawers, then every folder in the office. The page was gone. And for the first time in my life, I felt afraid inside my own home. For the next several days, I tried to convince myself there had to be an innocent explanation for the missing signature page. Maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe Daniel had copied it months ago and forgotten to mention it. Maybe grief and age were finally making me forgetful, the way Ryan kept subtly implying older people became. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Someone had gone through my private documents, and in my heart, I already suspected who. I called Daniel Brooks the following morning. Daniel had been Walter's attorney first, then mine, after Walter died. He was 72 years old, sharp as a razor blade, and stubborn enough to survive the apocalypse. His office sat downtown in an old brick building near the harbor, filled with leather-bound books and framed photographs of fishing trips he'd taken over the last 40 years. When I explained about the missing document, his expression darkened immediately. You're certain it was there before he asked? Yes. And nobody else has access to your office, only family. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. That's sometimes worse. I hated how quickly he said it. Not because he was wrong, because part of me feared he was right. He asked several careful questions after that. Had Ryan ever asked about my accounts directly? Did Claire know details about my estate? Had anyone pressured me to sign documents recently? With every answer I gave, Daniel's face grew more serious. Finally, he folded his hands together. Janet, I want you to do something for me. What change? Every password connected to your banking investments and property records immediately. A chill crawled through me. You really think it's that serious? I think wealthy widows are often surrounded by people who mistake kindness for weakness. I drove home feeling sick. Charleston looked beautiful that afternoon. Tourists walked the historic streets with shopping bags, while horse carriages rolled past pastel-colored buildings. Normally, the city comforted me. Walter and I had built our entire life there. But that day, I felt strangely alone. When I arrived home, I immediately changed every password I could think of: bank accounts, investment portals, email accounts, property management systems. Then I replaced the lock on my office door. As the locksmith worked, I stood in the hallway feeling embarrassed by my own fear. Imagine that. A 68-year-old woman hiring security because she no longer trusted her own family. That evening, Claire called. "You changed your passwords?" she asked immediately. I froze. "How did you know that silence?" Then she answered too quickly. "Ryan mentioned you sounded upset earlier." Of course he had. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "Claire, has Ryan been talking to you about my finances? He's just worried about you. There's a difference between concern and obsession." She sighed heavily. "Mom, why are you acting like Ryan is some kind of criminal? Because he feels like one." But I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud. Instead, I rubbed my forehead and tried to keep my voice calm. "I'm not accusing anybody. I just value my privacy. You've become paranoid since Dad died." The words hit harder than she probably intended. Paranoid. That was exactly the word manipulative people loved using against older women. Not confused, not hurt. Paranoid. I ended the call shortly after that, but her words lingered long into the night. The next few weeks became a series of tiny moments that slowly poisoned my sense of safety. I noticed Ryan watching me carefully during family dinners, especially whenever finances came up. He began using phrases that sounded rehearsed. "You should think long term. Families need centralized financial planning. At your age, stress can become dangerous. At your age." He said it constantly, always smiling while saying it, as though wrapping insults in politeness somehow made them harmless. One Saturday afternoon, Claire and Noah came over while Ryan was supposedly golfing with clients. Noah ran straight to the backyard, while Claire helped me fold laundry in the living room. For a little while, things felt normal again. Then Claire casually asked Mom, "Where do you keep your legal paperwork these days?" I stopped folding a towel. "Why?" "No reason. Ryan just thinks it's important that somebody knows where everything is in case of emergencies." I looked directly at her. "Did Ryan ask you to ask me that?" Her silence answered the question. Something inside me cracked a little then. Not anger, heartbreak. Because Claire didn't even realize she was being used. She still thought she was protecting her family. I changed the subject after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling growing inside me. Ryan wasn't merely curious anymore. He was planning something. A few days later, Evelyn invited me to lunch at a small seafood cafe near the marina. Halfway through our meal, she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "I saw Ryan downtown Tuesday night. So he was arguing with a man outside a bar." I frowned. "About what I don't know, but it didn't look friendly." She hesitated. "The other man shoved him against a car." That unsettled me immediately. Ryan had always presented himself as polished and successful. Men like him avoided public scenes because appearances mattered more to them than truth. "Maybe it was business related," I said weakly. "Maybe," Evelyn replied. "Or maybe your son-in-law is in trouble." That sentence stayed with me. 3 nights later, I woke around 2 in the morning after hearing something downstairs. At first I thought it was the wind rattling branches against the windows. Then I heard it again. A soft, metallic sound. Like a drawer closing. My heart began pounding. I grabbed my robe and quietly stepped into the hallway. The house was dark except for faint moonlight spilling across the staircase. Another sound. From my office, I nearly called 911 right then, but before I could move, a shadow crossed the downstairs hallway. For one horrifying second, I thought someone had broken into my house. Then the figure stepped into the moonlight. Ryan. He froze when he saw me standing at the top of the stairs. Neither of us spoke. My voice finally came out shaking. "What are you doing here?" His expression changed instantly into smooth concern. "Jesus. Janet, you scared me. You have a key Claire had given him 1 year ago for emergencies, a decision I suddenly regretted deeply." Ryan held up a folder casually. "Claire said you needed help organizing some insurance paperwork." At 2 in the morning, his jaw tightened slightly before the smile returned. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd help out. I stared at him. Every instinct inside me screamed that he was lying. Then I noticed something in his hand. A single sheet of paper. And even from the staircase, I recognized the shape immediately. It was another copy of my signature. Ryan slowly folded the paper and slipped it into the folder. "You should really get more rest," he said calmly. "Stress isn't good for older people." Older people. Again. The threat hidden beneath the politeness was becoming impossible to ignore. I watched him leave through the front door without another word. The second his car disappeared down the street, I locked every door in the house. Then I sat alone in my kitchen until sunrise, with Walter's old baseball bat beside my chair. Because for the first time in my life, I was truly afraid that someone in my own family was hunting me for my money. After the night I caught Ryan inside my office, something fundamental changed inside me. Fear became vigilance. Every sound in my house made me alert. Every unexpected phone call tightened my chest. I started checking bank notifications twice a day and locking documents away like state secrets. But the hardest part wasn't the suspicion. It was pretending everything was normal around Claire. Because no matter how disturbed I felt by Ryan's behavior, Claire was still my daughter. I had carried her inside me, raised her, comforted her through childhood fevers and teenage heartbreak and the devastation of losing her father. Part of me kept hoping she would suddenly see what I saw, that she would wake up and recognize the darkness growing inside her husband. Instead, she kept defending him. A week after I caught Ryan snooping through my office at 2 in the morning, Claire called and asked if they could come over for Sunday dinner. "Ryan wants us to spend more family time together," she said. The irony almost made me laugh. Still, I agreed. Some foolish part of me thought maybe openness could still save us. That Sunday, I cooked far too much food the way mothers do when they're trying to repair things nobody else seems interested in repairing. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, cornbread, peach cobbler for Noah. The house smelled warm and familiar by the time they arrived. Noah ran in first and hugged me around the waist. "Grandma, are we having cobbler?" "Yes, baby," I said, kissing the top of his head. For a moment, the warmth of that child almost erased the tension. Then Ryan walked in behind Claire, smiling, always smiling. But his eyes had changed over the last year. They used to look confident, relaxed. Now they looked calculating. Like every conversation happening around him was part of a negotiation, nobody else realized they were trapped inside. Dinner started peacefully enough. Claire complimented the roast. Noah talked about baseball practice. Ryan poured wine for everyone except himself. "I'm trying to stay focused these days," he said. "Big opportunities ahead." I nodded politely. "What kind of opportunities?" "Financial consulting. Private clients." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. Then came the shift. It always came eventually. Ryan leaned back in his chair and glanced around my dining room slowly. "You know," he said casually, "Walter really built something incredible." My stomach tightened instantly. "Yes, he did. And you've managed it well too?" "Thank you. But it must be exhausting at your age." There it was again. At your age. I kept my expression neutral. "I managed just fine." Ryan smiled faintly. "I'm sure you think you do." Claire immediately jumped in. "Ryan's only saying you deserve less stress, Mom." Noah looked up nervously from his plate. Even he could feel the tension. Ryan folded his hands together. I've actually been researching something that could really help all of us. I already knew where this conversation was heading. A family trust, he continued. One centralized structure, smarter tax protection, easier management, total security. Daniel's warning echoed in my mind immediately. I set down my fork carefully. My finances are already professionally managed. Yes, Ryan replied smoothly, but outsiders shouldn't control family wealth. Outsiders. He meant my attorneys, my accountants, people who protected me from men like him. Claire looked at me carefully. Mom, maybe it's worth discussing. I stared at my daughter. You too. Her cheeks flushed. We're only trying to help. Ryan leaned forward slightly. The truth is, Janet's situations can become messy when older people suddenly get sick. Older people. Again. Every sentence from him sounded like a disguised threat now. I kept my voice calm. I already have legal protections in place. But not family protections, Ryan said. I trust my current arrangements. His smile faded slightly for the first time that evening. You trust strangers more than your own family. The manipulation in that sentence made my skin crawl. No, I replied quietly. I trust people who respect boundaries. Silence spread across the table. Even Noah stopped eating. Ryan picked up his wine glass, but didn't drink from it. You know what I think, he said softly. Claire immediately whispered Ryan, but he ignored her. I think wealthy people become paranoid because they spend their whole lives afraid someone might take what they have. I looked directly at him, and I think some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone else to die so they can inherit things they didn't earn. Claire gasped quietly. Ryan's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. I saw pure hatred flash across his face, gone almost instantly. But I saw it. So did Noah. The boy lowered his eyes toward his plate. Ryan forced out a laugh. That's harsh. So is breaking into my office in the middle of the night? The room froze. Claire looked horrified. Mom, Ryan interrupted immediately. I wasn't breaking in. You used your emergency key to go through my paperwork. I was helping organize documents. At 2 in the morning, his expression darkened. You're twisting things. No, I replied. I'm finally seeing them clearly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Claire looked close to tears. Please stop, she whispered. But Ryan wasn't finished. Neither was I. He leaned back slowly and crossed his arms. You know Claire worries about you. I worry about Claire, too. She's concerned you're isolating yourself. I almost laughed at the audacity. Is that what this is? I asked. An intervention, Ryan's eyes hardened. Someone has to think practically. Practicality doesn't involve stealing signature copies from my safe. Claire's head snapped toward him. What Ryan spoke instantly. She's confused. That word hit me like a slap. Confused? Not mistaken? Confused? As though age automatically erased credibility? I felt something cold settle deep inside my chest then. Not fear. Clarity. Ryan wasn't testing boundaries anymore. He was building a narrative. One where I appeared unstable, paranoid, forgetful. Exactly the kind of story someone creates before trying to take control of an older person's finances. Claire looked between us anxiously. Mom, Ryan would never steal from you. Ryan stayed silent. That silence told me everything. If he were innocent, he would have been outraged. Instead, he looked calculating, measuring how much I knew. Finally, he spoke quietly. Sooner or later, this money is going to become part of Claire's life anyway. I stared at him. And that bothers you because his voice dropped lower. Because you're acting like you're going to live forever? The cruelty of that sentence stunned even Claire. Ryan, she snapped. But he kept staring at me. Cold. Unblinking. For the first time since I'd known him, I no longer saw the charming businessman Claire married. I saw a desperate man watching a fortune he believed should already belong to him. And desperation makes dangerous people reckless. Noah suddenly pushed back his chair. Can I go watch TV? His small voice shattered the tension for a moment. Of course, sweetheart, I said gently. The second he left the dining room, Ryan stood. I think we should go. Claire looked shaken. Ryan, but he was already grabbing his coat. Before leaving, he turned toward me one last time. You should really think carefully about who you trust, Janet. Then they walked out. I stood alone in my dining room, listening to the front door close. The silence afterward felt enormous. A few minutes later, I noticed something on the floor near Ryan's chair. A folded piece of paper. I picked it up slowly. My blood ran cold instantly. It was a draft power of attorney form, with my name already typed onto it. I barely slept after finding the power of attorney form on my dining room floor. The paper sat on my kitchen counter all night like a loaded weapon. Every time I walked past it, my chest tightened. Because now I had proof. Not legal proof yet, but proof enough for my instincts. Ryan wasn't merely curious about my finances anymore. He was preparing to take control of them. The next morning, I called Daniel before 8 o'clock. You need to come to my office immediately, he said after hearing about the document. An hour later, I sat across from him while he carefully reviewed the papers Ryan had dropped. Daniel's expression became grim almost immediately. This isn't some casual template, he said quietly. This was prepared intentionally. I swallowed hard. What exactly does it do? It gives financial authority to another party if you're deemed unable to manage your own affairs. My stomach dropped. And who was listed? Daniel looked directly at me. Ryan Bennett. Even hearing it aloud made me feel sick. Daniel continued flipping through the pages. What concerns me more, he said, is the wording. What do you mean? He specifically included clauses involving cognitive decline and asset transfers. I felt suddenly cold, despite the warm office. He's building a case, Daniel said carefully. One where you appear mentally unstable. The room spun slightly around me. I thought about every conversation Ryan had pushed over the past year. Paranoid, confused, forgetful, too old to manage stress. It had all been deliberate. He wasn't simply after money. He was preparing to erase my authority completely. Daniel removed his glasses. Janet, I need to ask you something difficult. I nodded slowly. Do you believe Ryan could become violent? The question startled me. No, I answered automatically. But even as the word left my mouth, uncertainty crept in, because I had already seen rage behind his eyes. Daniel watched my silence carefully. People willing to commit financial abuse often escalate when they lose control. I drove home afterward with trembling hands gripping the steering wheel. Charleston traffic blurred around me while memories replayed endlessly inside my head. Ryan standing in my office at 2 in the morning. Ryan calling me paranoid. Ryan staring at my wealth like it already belonged to him. By the time I reached home, exhaustion sat heavy in my bones. I locked the doors behind me immediately. Then I checked every room in the house like a frightened child. I hated what my life was becoming. Around noon, Claire called. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Mom. Her voice sounded strained. Yes. Ryan said things got heated at dinner. I nearly laughed at the understatement. He brought legal documents into my home, Claire. He says you misunderstood. Did he also explain why his name was listed as my financial authority? Silence? Long silence. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded smaller. He was trying to help us plan for the future. Us. Not me. Us. That single word told me everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Claire. Did you know about those papers? No. But she answered too fast. I heard it immediately, and so did she. Claire. Another silence. Then tears. Oh God, she whispered. Mom, please don't do this. The panic in her voice unsettled me deeply. What aren't you telling me? It's complicated. No, I replied quietly. It's actually becoming very simple. She began crying harder. You don't understand what Ryan's been dealing with. There it was. Excuses, protection, fear. I suddenly realized my daughter sounded less like a wife and more like someone trying to survive a dangerous situation. Before I could press further, she abruptly ended the call. That frightened me more than anything else. The rest of the afternoon passed in uneasy silence. Around 6 o'clock, rain began hammering the windows overlooking the marsh. The sky turned dark early, covering the house in gray shadows. I was making tea when the doorbell rang. My stomach dropped instantly. I checked the security monitor beside the kitchen. Ryan. Alone. Every instinct told me not to open the door. But another part of me, the mother who still believed families could somehow be repaired, overruled caution. That was my third mistake. The second Ryan stepped inside, I smelled whiskey. Not enough to make him stumble. Enough to sharpen the anger already simmering beneath his skin. "Where's Claire?" I asked immediately. "At home." Rainwater dripped from his coat onto my hardwood floors. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his eyes landed on the folder sitting near the kitchen counter. Daniel had returned the power of attorney papers to me earlier that day. Ryan noticed immediately. "You took those to a lawyer?" His voice changed instantly. Dangerously calm. "Yes." He laughed once under his breath. "You really are trying to turn this into a war." "No, Ryan. You did that yourself." He stepped closer. "You embarrassed me in front of my family." "My family," I corrected. His jaw tightened. "You've poisoned Claire against me." I stared at him in disbelief. "You forged legal documents." "They weren't forged." "You were preparing to declare me incompetent?" His eyes flashed. "You are acting incompetent." That sentence hit like ice water. I took a step backward instinctively. Ryan followed. "You know what your problem is?" he snapped. "You think money makes you untouchable." "No," I said quietly. "I think decency matters more than greed." His expression twisted. "You have millions sitting in accounts while your own family struggles." "You're not struggling," I replied sharply. "You're hunting." That word seemed to ignite something inside him. Suddenly, his entire mask disappeared. The polished businessman, the charming husband, gone. What stood in my kitchen now was an angry, desperate man unraveling in real time. "You think you're smarter than me?" he hissed. I moved toward the hallway. "I think you need to leave." Instead, he grabbed my arm. Hard. Pain shot through my shoulder instantly. Ryan let go of me. "You're going to sign those papers eventually." "No." His grip tightened. I said no. Then came the shove. So fast I barely processed it. My back slammed against the kitchen counter, knocking the breath from my lungs. Fear exploded through me. Real fear. Not suspicion. Not anxiety. Pure survival fear. I looked into Ryan's face and realized something horrifying. He wasn't in control anymore. "You're ruining everything," he shouted. I tried pulling away, but he grabbed my wrist again. "Ryan, stop," and then he hit me. One brutal punch across my face. The impact threw me sideways into the marble island. Pain burst through my mouth. I tasted blood instantly. For one stunned second, all I could hear was ringing. Then a scream shattered the room. Claire. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, horror written across her face. Noah behind her. Oh God. Noah had seen it. Ryan stepped backward immediately, as if waking from a trance. "Claire, what did you do?" she screamed. Blood dripped from my split lip onto the white tile floor. I pressed one trembling hand against the counter to stay upright. Ryan looked terrified now. Not guilty. Terrified. Because he realized what he'd done. Claire rushed toward me, crying. "Mom. Mom." But I couldn't even answer. I was staring upward, toward the small black security camera mounted near the pantry ceiling. Walter installed it years ago after a break-in down the street. Ryan slowly followed my gaze, and in that exact moment, I watched the color drain from his face, because he realized something too. The camera had seen everything. The strangest thing about being assaulted by someone you once trusted is how quickly your mind separates from your body afterward. Even while Claire was crying and holding ice against my swollen face, part of me felt oddly calm. Not because I wasn't hurt, because something inside me had finally stopped hoping Ryan Bennett could still become a good man. The illusion was dead. And sometimes clarity arrives through pain. Ryan kept pacing across my kitchen while rain hammered the windows outside. Janet. I lost control, he kept saying. I didn't mean it. But his panic wasn't about hurting me. It was about the camera. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted upward toward the small black lens mounted near the pantry. Claire noticed too. You hit my mother, she whispered in disbelief. Ryan ran both hands through his hair. You don't understand how stressed I've been. I almost laughed. There it was again. The excuse abusive people always use. Stress, pressure, temporary loss of control. As if pain somehow appeared out of nowhere instead of growing from the ugliness already living inside them. Noah stood frozen near the hallway, crying silently. That broke my heart more than my bruised face. A child should never look at his father with fear. I slowly straightened myself despite the throbbing pain in my jaw. Take Noah home, I told Claire quietly. Mom, take him home. She hesitated. Her eyes moved toward Ryan. Even then, even after watching him hit me, part of her still feared upsetting him. That realization hurt almost as much as the punch itself. Finally, Claire nodded weakly and guided Noah toward the door. Ryan stepped forward immediately. I should stay and explain. No, I interrupted sharply. For the first time since I'd known him, my voice carried absolutely no warmth toward him. Get out of my house. His face darkened instantly. I saw anger flicker again beneath the panic. Then his gaze shifted toward the camera once more. That fear won. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and followed Claire into the storm. The second the door closed behind them, my knees nearly gave out. I sat heavily at the kitchen table, while blood from my split lip stained a dish towel in my hands. The house became painfully quiet. I looked around slowly at the home Walter and I had built together. Family photos lined the walls. Christmas memories. Birthdays. Claire holding baby Noah in the hospital. Ryan smiling in vacation pictures. The life I thought we had suddenly felt fake. Like I'd spent years welcoming a stranger into my family. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel. I answered immediately. The moment he heard my voice, he asked, "What happened?" I hadn't even realized I was crying until then. He hit me. Silence. Then Daniel's tone changed completely. Are you injured? Yes. Call the police. I looked toward the window where rain blurred the darkness outside. I can't. Janet Noah saw everything. That's exactly why you must report it. I closed my eyes, but all I could picture was Claire's terrified face. My daughter was trapped between loyalty and fear, and I knew enough about abusive men to understand what came next. Ryan would apologize, cry, blame stress, promise change, and Claire would desperately want to believe him. Because the alternative, accepting that the man you married is dangerous, destroys people. Daniel spoke more gently. Listen to me carefully. You need medical documentation immediately. I wiped my eyes slowly. You sound like you expected this. I was afraid of escalation. That word echoed inside me. Escalation. Meaning Daniel believed Ryan's behavior had been building toward violence all along. Maybe it had. Maybe I'd simply refused to see it. An hour later, I sat inside the emergency room while a nurse carefully examined my face. The bruise along my cheekbone had already darkened purple. My lip required stitches. A younger doctor with tired eyes studied me quietly after reviewing the injuries. Did someone do this to you intentionally? The question sat heavily between us. I hesitated, and in that hesitation, shame flooded me unexpectedly. Not because I'd done anything wrong, because women of my generation were raised to protect family secrets at any cost, even ugly ones. Finally, I answered, yes. The doctor nodded slowly. Do you feel safe going home? That question frightened me more than the assault itself, because for the first time, I genuinely didn't know. After the examination, A social worker entered the room carrying paperwork. She spoke softly, professionally. We specialize in elder abuse cases. The phrase hit me like ice water. Elder abuse. I'd seen news stories about it before. Vulnerable older people manipulated by caregivers or relatives. But hearing those words attached to my own life felt surreal. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. And yet here I was, a wealthy widow sitting in a hospital while professionals documented injuries inflicted by her own son-in-law. The social worker asked if I wanted police involvement immediately. I surprised myself by saying no, not yet, because despite everything, I needed time to think, time to understand exactly how far Ryan's plans had gone, and time to protect Claire and Noah from the explosion I knew was coming. When I finally returned home after midnight, the house felt colder than ever. I locked every door, checked every window. Then I sat in my office, staring at the blinking security monitor. The footage was there, clear, undeniable. Ryan grabbing me, shoving me, punching me. I watched it once, only once. That was enough. At 2 in the morning, another thought suddenly struck me. If Ryan was desperate enough to assault me, what else was he desperate enough to do? The next morning, I met Daniel at his office again. The moment he saw my bruised face, rage flashed across his normally calm expression. "I'm going to ask you something important," he said carefully after closing the door. "And I need you to answer honestly." I nodded. "Do you intend to protect Claire?" "Of course." "And Ryan?" I looked away. Because despite everything, part of me still wanted to avoid destroying my daughter's marriage completely. Daniel saw the hesitation immediately. "Janet, dangerous men survive because decent people keep making excuses for them." I swallowed hard. Then I handed him a flash drive containing the security footage. Daniel stared at it for a long moment before taking it carefully. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know." "No," he replied. "You don't?" He opened a folder on his desk and slid several papers toward me. At first glance, they looked like routine financial records. Then I saw my own forged signature. My blood turned cold instantly. "What is this?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "An attempted transfer authorization request, submitted 3 weeks ago." I stared at him in horror. "He already tried accessing your accounts." Suddenly, the room felt too small. How much did he know? "That's what concerns me," Daniel replied grimly. "Enough to be dangerous." He pointed toward another document. "This," he said quietly, "is the beginning of financial predation." Predation, not misunderstanding, not family conflict. Predation. And in that moment, I finally understood something terrifying. Ryan Bennett hadn't punched me because he lost control. He punched me because his plan was collapsing. And desperate predators are at their most dangerous when they realize the prey is fighting back. Once you realize someone you trusted has been studying your weaknesses, you begin re-examining every memory through a different lens. That's what happened to me after Daniel showed me the forged financial documents. Suddenly, the past 2 years looked completely different. Ryan hadn't slowly become obsessed with my fortune. He had been planning for it all along. Daniel spent nearly 3 hours walking me through everything his office had uncovered. The deeper we looked, the uglier the truth became. Ryan had attempted to contact one of my junior investment managers, pretending to act on behalf of the family. He'd ask questions about account accessibility, emergency transfer procedures, and succession structures. At the time, the employee thought he was simply an involved son-in-law. Now it looked far more sinister. "He was mapping your financial systems," Daniel explained carefully. I sat motionless in the leather chair across from him. "How much does he know enough to attempt fraud?" Daniel opened another folder. Inside were printed emails, banking inquiries, and copies of documents Ryan had somehow accessed. I stared at them in disbelief. Some included property addresses only my accountants and legal team should have known about. "He's been inside your records repeatedly," Daniel said. A sick feeling spread through me. My God. Then came the number that truly terrified me. Daniel slid a financial report toward me. Ryan Bennett currently owes approximately $680,000. I blinked at him. That can't be right. It is. I stared down at the pages. Private loans, failed investments, credit lines, online gambling transactions. Some of the amounts were staggering. I looked back up slowly. Claire knows about this. Not all of it. My stomach twisted, because suddenly everything made sense. The manipulation, the pressure, the obsession with controlling my estate. Ryan wasn't just greedy, he was drowning. And drowning people often drag others down with them. Daniel leaned forward. There's another issue. I almost didn't want to ask. What now? One of the lenders tied to these debts has connections to organized financial fraud investigations. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You mean criminals? I mean people who don't tolerate losing money? Fear moved through me again. Not only for myself now, for Claire, for Noah. I thought back to what Evelyn told me about seeing Ryan arguing downtown. Maybe that hadn't been business stress. Maybe Ryan had already been desperate enough to borrow from dangerous people. Daniel removed his glasses slowly. Janet, I need you to understand something clearly. This situation may escalate further once Ryan realizes he's losing access to you financially. He already assaulted me. Yes, Daniel replied quietly. And people who commit financial abuse often become more unstable when exposed. I drove home afterward feeling hollow. The Charleston sky hung gray and heavy over the water, matching the exhaustion pressing against my chest. For the first time in years, my beautiful home no longer felt peaceful. It felt exposed. That evening, I walked through every room, checking windows and locks again. I even called a security company about upgrading the camera systems around the property. Walter would have hated seeing me live this way, but Walter also would have protected me without hesitation. I missed him terribly then, not just as my husband, as my shield. Around 7 that evening, Claire arrived unexpectedly, alone. The moment I opened the door, I saw she'd been crying. Can I come in? I stepped aside silently. She looked exhausted, pale, fragile, like someone trying to hold together a collapsing life with bare hands. We sat in the living room without speaking for nearly a minute. Then Claire whispered, Ryan says you're trying to destroy him. I almost laughed at the absurdity. He punched me, Claire. Fresh tears filled her eyes immediately. I know. Then why are you here defending him? I'm not defending him. But she sounded defensive anyway. I studied my daughter carefully. There were dark circles beneath her eyes I hadn't noticed before. Her hands trembled slightly while holding her purse. How long has he been controlling you? I asked quietly. She froze. The silence that followed answered me before she spoke. Mom. How long? Claire looked away. And suddenly I saw it. Not just fear, shame. That realization broke something inside me, because no daughter wants her mother to discover she's trapped in a miserable marriage, especially not after years of pretending everything was perfect. Finally, she spoke softly. Things changed after Ryan lost his job. I stayed silent. At first, he was just stressed, angry all the time. Then the debts started. What debts? Claire closed her eyes briefly. Investment losses. I thought about Daniel's report. That's not all, is it? She shook her head slowly. There was gambling, too. My heart sank. How bad he kept saying he could win everything back. Classic addiction, classic desperation. I suddenly understood why Ryan had become so obsessed with my money. In his mind, my fortune wasn't wealth. It was rescue. Claire wiped tears from her cheeks. At first, I didn't know how serious it was. Then collectors started calling. Ryan became different. Different how her voice dropped lower. Controlling. The word landed heavily between us. I thought back over the years. The subtle interruptions whenever Claire spoke. The way Ryan answered questions directed at her. How isolated she'd slowly become from friends. God. How had I missed it? He said if I supported him through this, things would get better, Claire whispered. And did they? She shook her head. They got worse. I moved closer instinctively and took her trembling hand. For a moment, she looked like my little girl again. Claire, I said gently, has he ever hurt you physically? Her silence terrified me. Then she whispered, only once. Rage surged through me so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. When, a few months ago, I closed my eyes briefly. That monster. He apologized afterward, she rushed to say. He cried, said he was under pressure. Exactly like after hitting me. Because abusive men always follow violence with remorse once consequences appear. Claire, I said carefully, you and Noah need to leave him. Fear flashed across her face instantly. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Her voice became barely audible. He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd take Noah from me. My stomach turned cold. And he said, she stopped. What? That. If he lost everything, he'd make sure we all lost everything. The threat hung heavily in the room. For the first time, I realized Ryan wasn't merely manipulative. He was dangerous. Claire began crying harder. I didn't know what to do anymore. I wrapped my arms around her while she shook against me. And despite everything, despite her silence, despite her failure to protect me, she was still my daughter, still my child. Eventually, her breathing steadied. Then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. There's something else? I pulled back slightly. What Claire stared at the floor. A few weeks ago, Ryan met with someone about elder care facilities. My heartbeat slowed. What kind of facilities? Nursing homes. The room suddenly felt airless. He said, Claire swallowed hard. He said it would be easier to manage your estate if you were declared mentally unfit. I stared at her in horror, and suddenly, every piece of the puzzle locked together perfectly. The forged documents, the comments about my age, the accusations that I was paranoid. Ryan wasn't just trying to steal my money, he was preparing to erase my independence entirely. And if Claire hadn't finally broken down and told me the truth, I truly believe he would have succeeded. After Claire confessed the truth about Ryan's debts and threats, we sat together in my living room long after midnight. Neither of us wanted to say out loud what had become painfully obvious. My daughter was living in fear, and somehow I had missed it. The rain outside had finally stopped, but the silence inside my house felt unbearably heavy. Claire sat curled beneath one of my old knitted blankets while staring blankly at the fireplace. I kept thinking I could fix him, she whispered. That sentence nearly shattered me. Because women like Claire are raised to believe love means enduring suffering quietly. They believe patience can heal cruelty. That if they just become more understanding, more supportive, more forgiving, the man hurting them will finally change. But abusive people don't change because others love them harder. They change only when consequences arrive. And sometimes, not even then. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You should have told me. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I was ashamed. My heart broke hearing that. Ashamed. Not angry at Ryan. Ashamed of herself. That's what manipulation does to good people. It convinces victims that surviving abuse is somehow their failure. Claire wiped her cheeks with trembling fingers. Ryan wasn't always like this. I stayed quiet because part of me still remembered the charming young man who carried boxes into her first apartment and brought flowers to family dinners. But another part of me now understood something darker. Maybe Ryan had always been this person. Maybe desperation had simply stripped away the mask. Claire leaned her head back against the couch. After he lost his job, he became obsessed with proving himself again. He said everybody underestimated him. I remembered Ryan repeating similar things during dinners. Ambitious men, jealous coworkers, people holding him back. At the time, I thought it was wounded pride. Now I recognized it as resentment, the kind that festers until it poisons everything around it. Claire took a shaky breath. At first it was little things, mood swings, yelling, accusing me of not supporting him enough. And then he started monitoring every dollar I spent. I frowned. What do you mean I had to explain grocery purchases? Gas. Clothes for Noah. Her voice cracked. Sometimes he'd take my debit card for days. Rage simmered quietly inside me. Financial control, isolation, fear. The signs had been there all along. I simply hadn't wanted to see them. Claire stared down at her hands. He kept saying, "Your money could solve everything." Not our money. Your money. Even now, Ryan viewed my life's work as an escape route for his failures. I stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen to make tea, mostly because I needed a moment to steady myself. While the kettle heated, I stared out the window toward the dark marshlands beyond my backyard. Walter used to say storms reveal weak foundations. Maybe that's what this entire nightmare really was. Not a family suddenly breaking apart, a family finally revealing the cracks that had existed for years. When I returned to the living room, Claire looked smaller somehow, fragile, exhausted. "How much does Ryan know about my finances?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. Too long. My stomach tightened. Claire. He made me show him some paperwork before she admitted softly. "What paperwork? Property summaries. Investment reports." My chest ached. "Why would you do that?" "He told me married couples shouldn't keep secrets. Manipulation disguised as intimacy." I sat beside her again. "Did he ever access my accounts directly?" "I don't think so." "Think, not know." Claire suddenly looked terrified. "Oh my God." "What? A few months ago, he borrowed my laptop overnight." The fear in her voice told me she'd just realized something awful. "He said he needed to print resumes." "Claire, I forgot I had some of your account files saved from helping you organize taxes." There it was. Another door Ryan quietly opened. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand. "I didn't know." "I know. And I did know." That was the hardest part of all this. Claire wasn't malicious. She was manipulated slowly, carefully, until she no longer recognized how dangerous things had become. Suddenly, headlights swept across the front windows. Claire froze instantly. My body tensed. A car door slammed outside, then another. Claire's face lost color. "It's him." I stood immediately and checked the security monitor beside the hallway. Ryan's black SUV sat in my driveway. My pulse quickened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Claire whispered. "He tracked my phone." That terrified me instantly. "Turn it off." She grabbed her purse with shaking hands and powered down her cell phone. A moment later, violent pounding shook the front door. Claire Ryan's voice thundered through the house. "Open the damn door." Claire flinched visibly. That reaction alone told me everything I needed to know about their marriage. Ryan pounded again. "Claire, I know you're in there." I grabbed Walter's old baseball bat from beside the hallway closet before moving toward the door. "Mom, don't." "It's okay." No, it wasn't okay. But I was done acting afraid inside my own home. I opened the front door only halfway, keeping the security chain locked. Rainwater still clung to Ryan's coat, despite the storm ending earlier. The moment he saw Claire behind me, fury flashed across his face. "What are you doing here?" he snapped at her. I stepped slightly forward. "She's with me." Ryan ignored me completely. "Claire, get in the car." "No." The word came out weak but firm. His eyes narrowed instantly. "You're embarrassing yourself. I'm staying here tonight." Ryan's jaw tightened hard enough to visibly twitch. Then he looked at me, and suddenly the polite mask returned. It was horrifying how quickly he could switch personalities. "Janet," he said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I almost laughed. A misunderstanding. "You know I'd never intentionally hurt you." The bruise across my face practically answered for me. Ryan lowered his voice. "Can we talk privately?" "No." His expression darkened. "Claire is emotional right now." "No," I replied coldly. "Claire is frightened." That struck him harder than I expected. For a brief second, pure anger flashed across his face again. Then he forced another smile. "You're turning her against me." "No," I said quietly. "Your actions are." The silence between us became razor sharp. Finally, Ryan's eyes shifted toward the security camera mounted near the front porch. I saw fear there again, not remorse. Fear. Because he knew evidence existed now. His voice dropped lower. You really want to do this publicly? The threat beneath those words chilled me. I tightened my grip on the bat slightly. I think you should leave. For several long seconds, Ryan simply stared at me. Then his gaze moved toward Claire again. And what I saw in his eyes then terrified me more than the punch itself. Possession. Not love, ownership. As though Claire was something being taken away from him. Finally, he stepped backward. This isn't over, he said quietly. Then he walked back toward his SUV and disappeared into the darkness. The second his taillights vanished, Claire collapsed into tears. I locked the door immediately. Then every window, then the security alarm. Claire looked at me with panic. He's going to lose it now. I turned toward her slowly. No, I said quietly. He already did, and deep inside, I knew something else too. Ryan Bennett was no longer just trying to steal my fortune. Now he was trying to regain control of the family he believed belonged to him. And desperate men become most dangerous when they realize they're losing both money and power at the same time. The morning after Ryan came pounding on my front door, I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped reacting emotionally, and I started thinking strategically. Fear gives dangerous people power. Calm takes it away. That didn't mean I wasn't frightened anymore. I was. Every sound outside still made my pulse jump. Every unknown number calling my phone made my stomach tighten. But Walter had taught me something years ago during difficult business negotiations. Never let desperate people know when you've already seen through them. So instead of collapsing, I began preparing. Daniel arrived at my house just after 9 that morning, carrying 2 folders and a laptop. Claire stayed upstairs with Noah while we sat in the kitchen reviewing everything we knew. The bruise across my cheek had darkened overnight into deep shades of purple and blue. Daniel glanced at it several times while trying not to show anger, but I could see it anyway. You should have called the police immediately, he muttered. I know. Janet, this man assaulted you, attempted financial fraud, and has likely been manipulating your daughter for years. I know. Then why are we hesitating? Because I still loved my daughter. Because once police became involved, there would be no pretending this was merely a family conflict anymore. It would become public, permanent, real. Daniel studied me quietly. You're still trying to protect Claire. She's terrified. She's also an adult woman raising a child around an unstable man. His words hurt because they were true. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Both of us froze immediately. Daniel stood first and checked the security monitor. Relax, he said. It's Detective Moreno. A few minutes later, Detective Lisa Moreno sat across from us in my living room, reviewing the security footage from the kitchen camera. She watched the entire assault without speaking, Ryan grabbing my arm. The shove, the punch, Claire screaming. When the footage ended, she paused the screen and leaned back slowly. This is strong evidence, she said calmly. Strong evidence. Such clinical words for something that shattered my family. Lisa Moreno was in her early 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd spent years handling domestic violence and financial exploitation cases. I could tell almost immediately that she understood Ryan's type. Men like this escalate gradually, she explained. Control first, isolation second, financial pressure third, violence once they feel power slipping away. The accuracy of that statement chilled me. Claire quietly entered the room halfway through the conversation. The moment she saw the paused image of Ryan raising his fist toward me, she burst into tears again. Detective Moreno softened immediately. Mrs. Bennett, she said gently, none of this is your fault. Claire sat down, trembling. You don't understand, she whispered. Ryan wasn't always like this. The detective gave her a look. I'll never forget. Yes, she replied quietly. He probably was. Silence filled the room, because deep down, we all knew she was right. People don't become abusive overnight. They reveal themselves slowly, like rot spreading beneath beautiful paint. After Claire went back upstairs, Detective Moreno turned toward me again. "There's enough here for assault charges immediately," she said. I nodded slowly. "But I don't think assault is the whole story." Daniel handed her copies of the forged documents and suspicious transfer requests. The detective's expression hardened immediately. "Well," she muttered, "that certainly changes things." For the next hour, we discussed Ryan's debts, the attempted financial manipulation, and the possibility that he intended to pursue guardianship claims against me. When we finished, Detective Moreno closed the folder carefully. "I think your son-in-law believes he's smarter than everyone around him." "He does," I replied. "Good," she said calmly. "Men like that make mistakes once they become arrogant." That sentence stayed with me long after she left, because she was right. Ryan still believed he could manipulate this situation. He thought Claire would eventually return to him. He thought I was frightened. And most importantly, he thought nobody understood how far his plans had already gone. That arrogance would become his weakness. Late that afternoon, Daniel received a phone call that shifted everything again. It came from one of Ryan's former business associates. The man refused to speak over the phone, but agreed to meet privately. 3 hours later, Daniel returned to my house looking grim. "He's worse off than we thought," he said immediately. "How he's been lying to multiple investors." I felt sick. Daniel sat heavily at the kitchen table. One failed deal alone cost nearly $300,000. He borrowed money promising returns that never existed. Fraud. Not just debt. Fraud. "And there's more?" Daniel continued. "Apparently, Ryan's been telling people he expects access to significant family wealth soon." I stared at him. "My money." "Yes." The room suddenly felt colder. Daniel leaned forward. "Janet Ryan has built his entire recovery plan around gaining access to your assets." That explained everything. The obsession, the manipulation, the pressure to transfer authority. Ryan wasn't trying to improve his life. He was trying to save himself using mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked quietly, "How dangerous do you think he is?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation terrified me more than any answer could have. Around 7 that evening, Claire finally came downstairs after putting Noah to bed in the guest room. She looked exhausted. "I need to tell you something," she said softly. I immediately felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" Claire sat slowly across from me. "Ryan called 31 times today." 31. She nodded. "And he keeps sending messages. Threatening. At first apologizing, then blaming you, then begging me to come home. Classic escalation." I'd seen enough stories over the years to recognize the cycle now. Charm, anger, remorse, manipulation, fear. Repeat. Claire stared down at her hands. "He says you're trying to ruin Noah's family." "No," I replied quietly. "Ryan ruined his family when he chose violence." Tears slipped down her cheeks again. "I know." Then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "He also said, if he loses everything, he has nothing left to lose." Daniel and I exchanged a glance instantly. Dangerous statement. Very dangerous. That night, after Claire went upstairs, Daniel stayed behind a little longer. "You need a plan," he said carefully. "I have one." "No," he replied. "You have survival instincts. We need strategy." I looked at him carefully. "What are you suggesting?" A slow, thoughtful expression crossed his face. "I think Ryan still believes he can manipulate you." "He does. Then maybe we let him keep believing that for a little while." I frowned slightly. Daniel lowered his voice. "Desperate men talk too much once they think they're winning." The idea settled heavily between us. "You want to bait him." "I want evidence," Daniel corrected. And suddenly, I understood exactly what he meant. Ryan was already unraveling. If he believed I was finally giving in, he might expose everything himself. For the first time since Ryan punched me, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Control. The next morning, I made the call myself. Ryan answered immediately. "Janet." His voice sounded cautious, tired, hopeful. I forced calmness into my tone. I think we need to talk. Silence. Then careful relief. Okay. I've been thinking about the family trust proposal. Another silence. Longer this time. And beneath it, I could practically hear his greed waking up again. I'm willing to discuss options, I continued, with my financial advisor present. Ryan exhaled slowly. Finally, he whispered. He thought he was winning. That was exactly what we needed him to believe, because Ryan Bennett had spent months treating me like prey. Now it was time for him to walk willingly into the trap instead. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at a private financial office downtown, and for the first time in weeks, Ryan Bennett sounded excited. That alone told me everything I needed to know. A decent man would have been focused on apologizing after assaulting his mother-in-law. Ryan was focused on money. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, carefully applying makeup over the fading bruise on my cheek. No matter how much concealer I used, the shadow remained visible beneath my skin. A reminder, a warning, a scar that hadn't fully formed yet. Claire appeared quietly in the doorway while I adjusted my earrings. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. I looked at her reflection in the mirror. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." She folded her arms tightly around herself. "I'm scared he's going to snap." He already did. The truth of that settled heavily between us. Claire stepped farther into the room. "Mom, what if this makes everything worse?" I turned toward her slowly. Sweetheart, things became worse the moment Ryan decided violence was acceptable. Tears filled her eyes instantly again. God, she cried so easily these days. That's what prolonged fear does to people. It wears their nervous system down until even breathing feels exhausting. I walked over and gently held her hands. "You and Noah are staying here today. Doors locked. Security system on." Claire nodded weakly. Then she asked the question I knew had been haunting her. "Do you think he ever loved me? That nearly broke me?" Because despite everything Ryan had done, my daughter was still grieving the fantasy of the marriage she thought she had. I chose my words carefully. I think Ryan loved being admired, needed control, needed validation. I paused softly, but real love doesn't make people afraid. Claire looked down immediately. And deep inside, I think she finally accepted the truth she'd been avoiding for years. An hour later, Daniel and I arrived at the office building downtown. The conference room had been deliberately arranged to appear ordinary and professional. A long, polished table, bottled water, financial charts on the wall. Everything looked harmless, which was exactly the point. But hidden inside that room were two tiny recording devices. And in the office next door, Detective Moreno and another investigator were listening in quietly. Daniel adjusted his tie while reviewing documents. "You remember the plan?" I nodded. "Stay calm. Let him talk." Exactly. The goal wasn't to trick Ryan into confessing murder. It was simpler than that. Arrogant people reveal themselves when they believe they've already won. At precisely 2 o'clock, Ryan entered the conference room, and for a moment seeing him again made my stomach tighten painfully, because memory is cruel. Part of me still remembered Christmas mornings, family vacations, Ryan carrying Noah on his shoulders. But then I remembered the fist connecting with my face, and clarity returned immediately. Ryan wore a navy suit and expensive watch, despite supposedly drowning in debt. His smile appeared polished and controlled again. The charming businessman had returned. "Janet," he said warmly, as though he hadn't assaulted me days earlier. I noticed his eyes flick briefly toward the bruise on my cheek, before quickly looking away. Interesting. Shame still existed somewhere inside him after all. Too bad it arrived too late. Ryan shook Daniel's hand smoothly. "Mr. Brooks?" "Ryan." We all sat down. For the first few minutes, Daniel intentionally kept the discussion formal and boring. Trust structures, asset management, long-term planning. Ryan played the role perfectly. Calm, respectful, professional. But underneath that polished exterior, I could feel his impatience vibrating. He wanted the finish line. Finally, Daniel slid a folder across the table. These are preliminary management transition concepts Janet agreed to review. Ryan's eyes sharpened immediately. There it was. Greed. Pure and naked. He opened the folder quickly, scanning page after page. Most of the documents were legitimate-looking financial drafts, prepared specifically for this meeting. But hidden among them were acknowledgement forms and disclosure statements carefully crafted by Daniel. Papers Ryan assumed were procedural. In reality, they documented intent. Ryan leaned back slightly. "This makes sense," he said confidently. "Honestly, this should have happened years ago." I kept my expression uncertain on purpose. "You really think I'm incapable of handling things myself?" Ryan softened his voice immediately. "No, Janet. But stress at your age can become dangerous." There it was again. That rehearsed narrative. Daniel spoke carefully. "Ryan, for legal purposes, we need clarity regarding why financial authority changes are being considered." Ryan barely hesitated. "Well, Claire and I have been increasingly concerned about Janet's decision-making. Decision-making, not health, not safety. Control." I lowered my eyes slightly, pretending discomfort. "What kinds of concerns?" Ryan sighed dramatically. "Forgetfulness, confusion, emotional instability." The lies rolled out so naturally it was terrifying. Daniel nodded as if thoughtfully considering the statement. "And you believe you're capable of managing her assets responsibly?" "Absolutely." The confidence in his voice almost made me sick. Daniel slid another page toward him. "This acknowledgement simply confirms your proposed role in future asset oversight." Ryan signed immediately. Too quickly. Exactly as Daniel predicted. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. And slowly, Ryan began exposing himself even more. Honestly, he admitted at one point someone has to step in before Janet damages the estate. Estate, not family, not care, money. I asked quietly. "Damages it?" How Ryan leaned forward. "She gives too much control to outsiders. Lawyers, advisors." He laughed lightly. "People who don't actually care about family wealth?" Daniel remained perfectly calm. "And your interest is purely family protection." Of course. Then came the moment everything shifted. Daniel casually asked, "Have you previously attempted to access or reorganize any of Janet's financial structures?" Ryan hesitated, only briefly, but it was enough. "Well, I explored possibilities." "Meaning?" Ryan shrugged confidently. "Nothing illegal, just preparing for future transitions." Future transitions. Such clean language for theft. Daniel slid another paper toward him. "This confirms prior exploratory efforts were initiated by you independently." Ryan barely glanced at it before signing again. Arrogance makes people careless. By then, Ryan was practically glowing with confidence. He truly believed I was surrendering. At one point, he even smiled directly at me. "You're doing the right thing, Janet." I forced myself not to react, because the truth was almost unbearable. This man genuinely believed he deserved my life's work. Not because he earned it, because he married my daughter? Toward the end of the meeting, Ryan relaxed enough to start talking more openly. That was the real breakthrough. "You know," he said casually, "families fall apart when older people refuse to let go of control." Daniel nodded neutrally. "And if they refuse," Ryan smirked slightly, "sometimes legal intervention becomes necessary." My pulse slowed instantly. There it was. The guardianship threat. Spoken aloud, documented, recorded. Ryan kept talking, unaware he was destroying himself with every sentence. I mean, courts step in all the time when aging people become irrational. I looked directly at him then. "And you think I'm irrational?" For the first time, something cold appeared behind his smile. "I think you've made things harder than they needed to be." Not grief, not concern, resentment. Because in Ryan's mind, my resistance was inconveniencing him. Nothing more. When the meeting finally ended, Ryan stood and adjusted his cuffs confidently. I think this was productive. Daniel smiled faintly. Oh, he replied calmly. It absolutely was. Ryan walked out of the office believing he had just secured the first step toward controlling my fortune. What he didn't realize was that he had actually spent the last hour building the case that would destroy him. 3 days after the meeting downtown, I invited the entire family to my house, including Ryan. It was the last thing he expected, and exactly what Daniel wanted. Keep everything normal, he advised me beforehand. People reveal themselves most clearly when they feel safe. So I cooked dinner, just like always. Roasted chicken, green beans, Walter's favorite garlic mashed potatoes. From the outside, it looked like a family trying to heal after conflict. But underneath that carefully staged evening sat enough evidence to destroy Ryan Bennett's entire life. Claire was pale and nervous from the moment she arrived. Noah stayed unusually quiet beside her, clutching a baseball cap tightly in both hands. Ryan, meanwhile, appeared almost relaxed. That frightened me more than anger would have, because it meant he truly believed he had regained control. He kissed Claire's cheek when they entered the dining room, then smiled warmly at me as though he hadn't threatened, manipulated, and assaulted me within the same month. "You look better," he said casually, glancing at the fading bruise near my cheekbone. I smiled politely. "Thank you." Daniel had warned me to remain calm no matter what happened tonight. Ryan needed to feel confident, safe, untouchable. That confidence would make his fall even harder. Evelyn sat quietly at the far end of the dining table, pretending to focus on Noah while secretly observing everything. Daniel arrived shortly afterward, carrying a slim black briefcase. Ryan noticed immediately. "I didn't realize this was a business dinner," he joked lightly. Daniel smiled faintly. Families often become complicated business matters. Ryan laughed. Claire did not. Dinner started stiff and uncomfortable. Noah barely touched his food. Claire kept glancing nervously between Ryan and me. And Ryan? Ryan performed. That's the only word for it. He complimented the meal, asked Noah about baseball, talked about future opportunities and rebuilding stability. Anyone watching from outside would have thought he was a devoted husband trying to repair a family misunderstanding. But every now and then, his eyes drifted toward me, calculating, waiting. Eventually, Ryan cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. "I'm glad we're all together," he said smoothly. "I think families should solve problems privately whenever possible." There it was, the first attempt at controlling the narrative. Daniel sipped his wine calmly. "Depends on the problem." Ryan smiled slightly. "Well, emotions got out of hand. Misunderstandings happened. Misunderstandings. Such a neat little word for violence." Claire lowered her eyes toward her plate. I stayed quiet intentionally. Ryan took my silence as encouragement. You know, he continued, stress affects everyone differently, especially older people dealing with grief and isolation. My stomach tightened. Even now, even after everything, he was still trying to build the same story. The unstable widow, the emotional elderly woman, the confused matriarch. Evelyn finally spoke sharply. "Funny," she said coldly. "Janet never seemed confused until you started asking about her money." The tension around the table tightened instantly. Ryan forced out a laugh. "I think everyone's gotten a little dramatic." That word irritated me more than I expected. Dramatic. As though assault and fraud were simply emotional overreactions. Daniel set down his fork carefully. "Actually, Ryan, I think clarity is very important tonight." Something shifted in Ryan's expression immediately. Not fear, alertness. Predators recognize danger faster than ordinary people. "What exactly does that mean?" he asked carefully. Daniel calmly opened his briefcase. Claire looked suddenly panicked. Ryan's smile faded slightly. Then Daniel removed several folders and placed them on the dining table one by one. The room became painfully quiet. Ryan stared at the paperwork. What is this documentation? Daniel replied calmly. My pulse pounded hard inside my chest. This was it, the moment everything finally broke open. Ryan leaned back slowly. I don't understand. Yes, Daniel said quietly. You do? Then he slid the forged financial requests across the table. The color drained slightly from Ryan's face. Claire gasped softly beside him. Daniel's voice remained calm and professional. These are unauthorized transfer attempts connected to Janet Hamilton's accounts. Ryan immediately recovered. That's ridiculous. Is it? Ryan straightened in his chair. I was trying to help organize family finances. Daniel slid another document toward him. The signatures appear copied from stolen legal paperwork. Ryan's jaw tightened visibly. This is insane. But underneath the anger, I saw something else now. Panic. Small at first, but growing. Claire whispered Ryan. He ignored her completely. Then Daniel placed another item on the table. The acknowledgement forms Ryan signed during the financial meeting downtown. His eyes widened slightly. What the hell is this? You signed them voluntarily, Daniel replied. Ryan grabbed the pages aggressively and skimmed through them. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine fear begin to emerge, because he finally realized he'd been outmaneuvered. You tricked me? He snapped. No, Daniel answered calmly. You exposed yourself. Ryan stood abruptly from the table. Noah flinched instantly. That tiny reaction shattered something inside me. Even his own son was afraid of him now. Ryan pointed toward me furiously. She manipulated this whole situation. I looked directly at him. You punched me in my own kitchen. That was an accident, Claire suddenly spoke up. No, it wasn't. The entire room froze. Ryan turned toward her slowly. Claire. You hit her, she whispered. I saw it. His face darkened immediately. You're seriously doing this right now. But Claire didn't back down this time. Tears filled her eyes, yet her voice stayed steady. You scared Noah. That hit him harder than anything else, because even Ryan understood how terrible that sounded aloud. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel quietly pressed a button on the remote sitting beside him. The television mounted across the dining room wall flickered to life. And suddenly, the kitchen security footage filled the screen. Ryan grabbing my arm. The shove. The punch. Claire screaming. Noah crying. The sound of my body hitting the marble counter echoed horribly through the room. Claire covered her mouth with trembling hands. Noah burst into tears immediately. Ryan looked absolutely stunned. Like seeing his own violence replayed publicly shattered the fantasy version of himself he'd built in his mind. Turn that off, he snapped hoarsely. Nobody moved. The footage ended. Silence swallowed the room. Then Daniel calmly placed one final folder on the table. Inside were copies of Ryan's debts, gambling losses, fraudulent investment activity, and financial investigations. Ryan stared at them in horror. How did you get these? Legally, Daniel replied. Ryan's breathing became heavier, more unstable, and suddenly I realized something chilling. He looked cornered, like an animal trapped with nowhere left to run. You ruined my life, he whispered toward me. I stared at him in disbelief. You ruined your own life the moment you decided my suffering was acceptable. That finally broke him. Ryan slammed both hands against the table violently. This family would be nothing without me. Noah cried harder upstairs instantly. Claire stood up shaking. Stop it. Ryan turned toward her with wild eyes. You think she cares about you, he shouted. She cares about her money? No, I said quietly. I care about surviving you. And right then, red and blue lights flashed across the front windows. Ryan froze. So did Claire. A car door slammed outside, then another. Detective Moreno entered the dining room moments later, accompanied by two officers. The second Ryan saw the police, real panic finally exploded across his face. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew he understood the game was over. The moment Detective Lisa Moreno stepped into my dining room, Ryan Bennett stopped pretending to be charming. The mask finally shattered completely. For weeks, maybe years, he had controlled every situation through manipulation. Smiles, intimidation, pressure, lies carefully wrapped in confidence. But now the room had changed. There were witnesses, evidence, police officers standing only a few feet away. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ryan looked genuinely afraid. Detective Moreno remained calm as she entered. "Ryan Bennett," she said evenly, "we need to speak with you regarding allegations of assault and financial fraud." Ryan laughed once under his breath, a harsh, unstable sound. "You've got to be kidding me." "No," she replied, "I'm not." Claire stood frozen beside the dining table, tears running silently down her face. Noah had retreated upstairs completely, but I could still hear faint crying through the ceiling. That sound tore through me. Children should never have to fear their own father. Ryan looked around the room wildly, as though searching for someone to rescue him. Nobody moved. Nobody defended him. Even Claire. Especially Claire. "You called the cops on me?" he asked her in disbelief. Claire shook visibly. "I didn't know they were coming tonight. But you knew about this." He gestured furiously toward the evidence spread across the table. "You helped them." Her breathing became shaky. I told the truth. That sentence hit him harder than the police presence itself, because abusive men rely on silence more than power. The second victims start telling the truth, the illusion collapses. Ryan stepped toward her instinctively. One of the officers immediately moved between them. "Sir, stay where you are." The rage in Ryan's eyes intensified instantly. "You think you can keep my family from me?" My family? Even now he spoke about Claire and Noah like possessions. Detective Moreno glanced toward me briefly before addressing him again. "We have security footage of the assault, documentation of attempted fraudulent transfers, and recorded statements regarding financial coercion." Ryan pointed toward Daniel immediately. "This old bastard set me up." Daniel remained perfectly calm. "No, Ryan. You set yourself up." Ryan's breathing became heavier. I watched his composure crack piece by piece. The polished businessman, the confident manipulator, gone. Now all that remained was desperation. And desperate people are frighteningly unpredictable. Claire suddenly stepped forward. "There's more." Everyone turned toward her. Even Ryan. Claire's face had become pale, but determined in a way I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, she removed her phone from her pocket. "I saved everything." Ryan stared at her. What Claire's voice trembled. "The emails, the texts, the recordings." My heart skipped. Ryan took a step toward her again before stopping himself. "You had no right." "No," Claire whispered. "You lost the right to privacy when you started threatening people." Detective Moreno gently held out her hand. Mrs. Bennett Claire handed over the phone. Ryan looked horrified now, truly horrified, because suddenly he understood this wasn't just about one violent moment anymore. It was a pattern, a trail, a story built over years. Claire wiped tears from her face. "You told me if Mom didn't cooperate, we'd put her in a facility." Ryan immediately snapped back. "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it was." "You're twisting things." Claire shook her head. "No, I've been protecting you for years." The room went silent, because that was the real tragedy underneath everything else. Not just the money, not just the violence. The years my daughter spent shrinking herself to survive a man who fed on fear. Ryan looked toward me suddenly. "You turned her against me." I stared directly at him. "No, Ryan. I helped her see you clearly." That broke something inside him completely. "You think you're innocent?" he shouted. "You sit in this giant house surrounded by money while everyone else struggles." The officers immediately stiffened again. I remained seated, strangely calm now, because once the truth is fully exposed, fear begins losing power. "I earned my life." I replied quietly. "You tried to steal it." Ryan laughed bitterly. "You were going to leave it all to Claire anyway. That doesn't give you the right to terrorize people for it." His face twisted with fury. You have no idea what pressure I was under. And there it was again. The excuse? Always the excuse? Pressure? Stress? Need? As though suffering transformed cruelty into something understandable. Detective Moreno stepped closer. Ryan Bennett, at this point, I'm advising you to stop talking. But he ignored her completely. Instead, he stared directly at Claire. I sacrificed everything for this family. Claire looked at him with heartbreaking exhaustion. No, she whispered. We sacrificed everything for you. Silence. Heavy, painful, final. Ryan looked stunned by her words. Because manipulative people rarely expect honesty from the people they control. Claire took a shaky breath. You isolated me from my friends. Ryan's expression hardened again. You chose that. You controlled our money. I managed finances. You threatened to take Noah from me. His jaw tightened. That was during an argument. You hit my mother. I said I lost control. Claire suddenly cried out louder than before. You never lose control at work. You never lose control in public. You only lose control around people you think can't stop you. That sentence shattered the room. Even Ryan fell silent. Because she was right, abuse is rarely random. It's selective, strategic, intentional. Claire's entire body shook now, but she kept speaking anyway. And I'm done being afraid of you. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Detective Moreno nodded slightly toward the officers. Ryan Bennett, you're being detained pending formal charges relating to assault and financial crimes. One officer stepped forward carefully. Please place your hands behind your back. Ryan stared around the room in disbelief. At me? At Claire? At the officers? Like he still couldn't comprehend how completely everything had collapsed. This is insane, he whispered. No one answered, because there was nothing left to say. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Noah suddenly appeared halfway down the staircase. Dad. Every adult in the room froze instantly. Ryan looked up. For one heartbreaking second, I thought he might finally show genuine remorse. Instead, he forced a smile. It's okay, buddy. But Noah didn't move toward him. He moved toward Claire, toward safety. That realization visibly wounded Ryan more than the handcuffs. Claire immediately wrapped her arms around Noah while he buried his face against her shoulder. I don't want him mad anymore, Noah whispered through tears. God. The room nearly broke me then. Children always tell the truth most clearly. Ryan looked shattered for the first time. Not because of police, not because of evidence, because his son feared him. The officers guided him toward the front door slowly. Before stepping outside, Ryan turned toward me one last time. His eyes no longer looked confident, or charming, or superior. They looked empty. You ruined everything, he said quietly. I held his gaze steadily. No, I replied. I survived you? The front door closed behind him moments later. And just like that. The silence inside my house changed. Not the fearful silence I'd been living with for months. A different kind. The kind that comes after surviving a storm. Claire collapsed onto the couch crying, while Noah clung tightly to her side. I sat down slowly beside them both, and for the first time in a very long time, none of us had to pretend anymore. People imagine courtroom justice as a dramatic moment where everything suddenly feels healed. It doesn't. Justice is slower than pain. Messier, too. 3 months after Ryan's arrest, I sat inside a Charleston courtroom, listening to attorneys argue over the worst period of my life as though it were paperwork. The assault charges alone would have been devastating. But once investigators fully uncovered Ryan's financial activities, the case exploded into something much larger. Fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, attempted unlawful asset manipulation. The prosecution even connected him to separate investment deceptions involving private lenders. Every week seemed to reveal another lie, and yet somehow sitting there in court, none of it felt satisfying, just exhausting. Claire sat beside me quietly, clutching tissues in her lap, while Noah remained with Evelyn outside the courtroom. We'd agreed he was too young to witness this part. Children deserve truth, but they also deserve protection. Ryan entered the courtroom wearing a dark gray suit that looked slightly too large on him now. He had lost weight during the months leading up to trial. Gone was the polished confidence he used to carry like armor. But what unsettled me most was this. Even after everything, he still looked angry. Not remorseful, angry. As though the world had betrayed him instead of the other way around. When his eyes landed on me, something cold passed between us. Then he looked away first. That mattered more than I expected. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, Ryan no longer seemed powerful. He seemed cornered. The prosecutor assistant district attorney, Melanie Reeves, was sharp and relentless. She understood immediately that this case wasn't simply about money, it was about control. Mr. Bennett systematically targeted an older family member, she told the jury during opening statements. He exploited trust, manipulated vulnerability, attempted coercive financial control, and escalated to physical violence once resistance appeared. Hearing my life summarized so clinically felt surreal. Targeted, manipulated, coercive control. Words I never imagined attached to my family. Ryan's attorney tried building a different story entirely. According to him, Ryan was merely a stressed husband under financial pressure who became involved in a family misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. A misunderstanding. The same cowardly word again. I sat there listening while anger slowly replaced sadness. Because reducing abuse to misunderstanding is how dangerous people escape accountability. Then came the evidence. The prosecution began with the financial records, forged signatures, unauthorized transfer requests, recorded conversations. The acknowledgement forms Ryan signed during the meeting Daniel orchestrated downtown. Watching Ryan hear his own recorded words, played aloud in court, was almost unsettling. You think you're irrational? Sometimes legal intervention becomes necessary. Older people become unstable. Every manipulative sentence echoed across the silent courtroom. Ryan stared down at the defense table while the recordings played. His attorney looked increasingly hopeless. Then came the security footage. I dreaded that part most. Even after months, I still hadn't fully recovered from seeing Ryan hit me. Some memories live inside your body permanently. When the prosecutor asked if I was ready, I nodded carefully. The courtroom darkened slightly as the footage began playing on the large screen. I heard several people gasp when Ryan shoved me into the marble counter. Then came the punch. Sharp, violent, final. Claire lowered her head immediately and began crying quietly beside me. I reached over instinctively and held her hand. Not because she was innocent in all of this, but because she had finally chosen truth, and that choice cost people dearly. When the footage ended, the courtroom remained silent for several long seconds. The prosecutor stood slowly. "Mrs. Hamilton," she asked gently, "what did you feel in that moment?" I swallowed hard. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I knew it too well. "I felt disposable," I said quietly. The room became still. I continued carefully. Not just hurt physically, disposable emotionally. Like my life had become an obstacle, standing between someone and money. Even Ryan looked up at that. But there was no apology in his face, only bitterness. The defense attorney tried hard during cross-examination. He questioned my memory, my emotional state after losing Walter, my financial decisions. At one point, he even implied I might have exaggerated Ryan's intentions due to fear. Fear, as though fear appears without reason. Finally, he asked carefully, "Mrs. Hamilton, isn't it possible Ryan Bennett genuinely believed he was helping protect family assets?" That question settled heavily in the courtroom. I looked directly at him before answering. "No." "Why not?" "Because people who want to protect you don't make you afraid of them." Silence. Then I added softly, "And they don't hit 68-year-old women in their own kitchens." Even the defense attorney looked uncomfortable after that. But the most devastating testimony came from Claire. I worried about her constantly before she took the stand. Not because I doubted her honesty, because telling the truth publicly about abuse destroys illusions people once depended on emotionally. Claire walked to the witness stand looking pale but steady. When asked about Ryan's behavior over the years, she spoke quietly at first, then stronger. She described the financial control, the manipulation, the threats involving Noah, the pressure surrounding my estate, the way Ryan slowly isolated her from friends and independence. Several jurors visibly reacted when she described him tracking her phone and threatening custody battles if she left. Then came the hardest moment. The prosecutor asked softly, "Mrs. Bennett, why didn't you leave earlier?" Claire's eyes filled with tears immediately. "Because I kept thinking if I became more understanding, he'd finally love me gently again." God. That sentence shattered the entire room. Even I struggled not to cry hearing it, because millions of women live inside that exact hope. The belief that enduring pain long enough will eventually earn tenderness, but abuse doesn't transform into love through patience. It deepens. Ryan stared at the table throughout most of her testimony. But when Claire described Noah becoming frightened of him, I finally saw something crack in his expression. Shame. Brief. Almost hidden. But real. Unfortunately, by then, it no longer mattered. The prosecution rested shortly afterward. Ryan chose not to testify, a decision his attorney probably insisted upon, because once evidence reaches a certain point, lies become dangerous even for liars. 2 days later, the jury returned. I barely slept the night before the verdict. Neither did Claire. We sat together in silence inside the courtroom while the foreperson unfolded the paper slowly. The words came one after another. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each count landed like another door closing forever. Ryan remained motionless at first. Then slowly his shoulders sagged. The judge later sentenced him to prison time for assault, fraud, forgery, and elder financial exploitation. But strangely, the sentencing wasn't the moment that affected me most. It happened afterward. As officers prepared to escort Ryan away, he turned toward me one last time. Not angry this time, just hollow. Broken by consequences he never believed would actually arrive. And suddenly, I realized something important. Ryan Bennett had spent years believing power came from intimidation, from manipulation, from making others feel small. But true power is quieter than that. It's the moment a victim finally stops being afraid. And sitting there in that courtroom, I finally wasn't afraid of him anymore. Life after survival is quieter than people imagine. There's no dramatic music, no magical feeling of closure, just small moments where breathing becomes easier again. 6 months after Ryan Bennett was sentenced, I stood barefoot on my back porch, watching the Charleston sunrise spread gold across the marshlands behind my home. For the first time in a long while, the silence no longer frightened me. It healed me. The bruises on my face had faded months earlier, but the emotional recovery took longer. Some nights I still woke suddenly after dreaming about Ryan's fist coming toward me. Sometimes loud voices in public restaurants made my body tense automatically. Trauma teaches the nervous system to stay alert long after danger leaves. But slowly, very slowly, peace returned. Claire and Noah moved permanently into a small rental cottage closer to my house after the trial. Not because I wanted to control her life, God knew we'd all suffered enough from control, but because she needed safety and space to rebuild herself. The first few months were difficult for her. Some mornings she could barely get out of bed. That surprised people who didn't understand abuse. They think leaving an abusive person immediately creates relief. Sometimes it creates grief first. Not grief for the cruelty, grief for the fantasy, for the marriage you hoped existed, for the version of someone you loved before reality destroyed the illusion. Claire carried enormous guilt too, not only for staying with Ryan, for failing to protect me sooner. One afternoon, she sat crying at my kitchen table while Noah played outside in the yard. "I should have stopped him before it got this far," she whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. You survived him, I said gently. That matters too. But he hurt you because of me. No, I replied firmly. Ryan hurt people because Ryan chose violence. That distinction mattered deeply. Victims carry enough shame already. I refused to let my daughter carry responsibility for a grown man's cruelty, too. Recovery became a process of rebuilding ordinary life. Claire started therapy twice a week. Noah began seeing a child counselor after his teachers noticed anxiety at school. And me? I buried myself in purpose again. But this time not through business, through women. After the trial, several local news outlets covered the case because elder financial abuse had become increasingly common across South Carolina. I hated the publicity at first. Then something unexpected happened. Women started contacting me. Letters, emails, phone calls. Some were widows manipulated by adult children. Others were pressured by caregivers, husbands, even grandchildren. One woman wrote, I saw myself in your story and realized I'm not crazy. That letter changed me because I finally understood something painful. Shame survives in silence. Truth weakens it. 3 months later, I used part of my investment income to establish the Hamilton Foundation for Elder Protection and Recovery. Daniel nearly cried when I told him, You're turning this nightmare into something meaningful, he said softly. I have to, I replied, because suffering without purpose poisons people. The foundation began small: legal assistance referrals, emergency housing partnerships, financial education seminars for older women vulnerable to manipulation. But within months, demand exploded. Apparently, there were far more women living in fear than I ever realized. Some arrived at our office shaking while whispering stories they'd hidden for years. Others sat in silence for 30 minutes before finally admitting someone they loved was exploiting them financially. Every story reminded me how easily society dismisses older women. People assume age makes us weak, confused, disposable. Ryan believed that too. He underestimated me because I had gray hair and grief in my eyes. That mistake cost him everything. One evening after foundation meetings ended, Claire stayed behind helping organize paperwork. The office overlooked Charleston Harbor, and sunset light poured orange across stacks of folders and legal brochures. She looked healthier than she had in years, still healing, but stronger. I used to think being kind meant tolerating everything she admitted quietly. I looked at her carefully. What do you think now? That kindness, without boundaries, becomes self-destruction. I smiled sadly. That took me 68 years to learn. She laughed softly through tears. That became our new normal sometimes. Laughter mixed with sadness. Healing mixed with memory. Real recovery isn't clean. It's layered, complicated, human. A few weeks later, Daniel visited my house carrying revised estate documents. I'd spent months reconsidering everything after the trial. Not because I stopped loving Claire, because I finally understood that love and access should never automatically coexist. Too many people confuse inheritance with entitlement. Ryan certainly had. Daniel spread the paperwork across my dining room table. You're sure about this? Yes. The new trust structure protected Noah's future education and long-term stability. Claire would still inherit eventually, but through carefully protected arrangements designed to prevent manipulation or reckless access. Not punishment. Protection. For both of us. I don't want money controlling this family ever again, I said quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. Walter would have been proud of you. That nearly broke me, because even after all these years, I still wished he were here to see us survive this. Later that night, Noah sat beside me on the porch swing, eating vanilla ice cream, while fireflies blinked across the backyard. Grandma, yes, sweetheart. Is Dad bad forever now? Children ask questions adults spend entire lifetimes avoiding. I thought carefully before answering. I think people make choices, I said softly, and some choices hurt others deeply. Noah looked down at his bowl. Did Dad stop loving us? My heart ached. No, baby. But sometimes people love in unhealthy ways when they're broken inside. He stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he asked something even harder. Can broken people get better? I looked out across the dark marshlands before answering. Yes, I whispered, but only if they truly want to. And deep down, I honestly didn't know whether Ryan ever would. Months later, I received one final letter from him through legal channels. Short, cold, not an apology. More like bitterness wrapped in self-pity. He still blamed everyone except himself. That was the moment I fully let go emotionally. Because true remorse requires accountability. Without that, forgiveness becomes dangerous. I burned the letter in my fireplace that same evening. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the flames consume the last remaining hold Ryan Bennett had over my peace. Outside, Charleston's evening breeze moved softly through the marsh grass, and for the first time in years, my home finally felt like mine again. A year after Ryan Bennett punched me in my own kitchen, I stood barefoot on the beach at sunrise and realized something surprising. I no longer thought about revenge. For a long time, I believed survival meant winning the court case, or protecting my fortune, watching Ryan finally face consequences. And yes, those things mattered. Justice matters. Boundaries matter. Protection matters. But healing is quieter than victory. Healing happens the first morning you wake up without fear tightening your chest. It happens when your daughter laughs again without sounding nervous. It happens when your grandson stops checking windows every time a car pulls into the driveway. That's the kind of victory nobody applauds loudly, but it's the one that saves lives. The beach near Sullivan's Island had become my favorite place after everything happened. Walter and I used to walk there when Claire was little, collecting shells while she chased seagulls across the sand. After he died, I stopped going for years because the memories hurt too much. Now the memories felt different, not painful, sacred. The ocean breeze moved softly through my silver hair while sunlight spread across the water in gold ribbons. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves for several moments before hearing footsteps behind me. Claire. She carried 2 cups of coffee and wore one of my oversized sweaters against the chilly morning wind. You disappeared early, she said softly, handing me a cup. I couldn't sleep. Bad dreams? I smiled faintly. No, just thinking. That was true. I thought a lot these days. About survival, about aging, about how quickly people underestimate older women. There's something society rarely admits openly. Once women grow older, many people stop seeing us as fully human. We become invisible unless someone needs something from us. Our wisdom becomes confusion. Our caution becomes paranoia. Our boundaries become selfishness. Ryan saw me that way too, not as a woman who spent decades building a life through sacrifice and hard work. Just an aging obstacle standing between him and money. But he made one fatal mistake. He confused kindness with weakness. Claire sat beside me on the sand. For a while, we watched the waves quietly. Then she whispered, I still feel guilty sometimes. I turned toward her. For what? For not seeing him clearly sooner. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Abusive people survive by creating confusion. That's how control works. She looked down at her coffee. I keep replaying everything in my head. Every red flag, every excuse. I did the same thing. That surprised her. You? I nodded slowly. For months after Ryan hit me, I kept asking myself how I missed the signs. I smiled sadly. The truth is, good people often struggle to imagine cruelty until they experience it directly. Claire leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, and for the first time in many years, she felt peaceful again. Not perfect, not fully healed, but safe. That mattered more. Noah arrived about an hour later, carrying a fishing pole almost bigger than himself. He'd grown taller over the past year, and the constant, nervous tension in his face had finally started disappearing. Grandma, he shouted excitedly. Mom says I can skip homework if I catch a fish. Claire laughed. I said maybe. Watching them together healed something inside me too. Trauma destroys families slowly, but love can rebuild them slowly too. Later that afternoon, we returned to my house for Sunday lunch. Evelyn came over carrying her usual lemon bars, and Daniel joined us after church wearing one of Walter's old fishing hats Noah insisted he borrow permanently. For the first time in a very long while, my dining room felt warm again. Not tense, not fearful, just alive. At one point during lunch, Noah looked up suddenly. Grandma, yes, sweetheart. Are you rich? The entire table burst into laughter. Children truly have no filter. I smiled. I suppose I am. Noah thought carefully before asking his next question. Then why don't you act rich? Even Daniel laughed at that one. I looked around the table slowly before answering. Because the most important things I have aren't money. Claire's eyes filled slightly with tears, and I realized then how much our family had changed. Before Ryan's downfall, money had become this poisonous thing hovering over every conversation. Now it felt smaller somehow, still important, but no longer the center of our lives. That evening, after everyone left, I walked slowly through my house, turning off lights one room at a time. I paused briefly in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Ryan hit me. For months, I avoided standing in that exact spot near the marble island because the memory overwhelmed me. But now it was simply my kitchen again. That mattered more than I can explain. Trauma steals ordinary things from people: rooms, songs, smells, silence. Healing is taking those things back. Before bed, I opened the drawer where I now kept the foundation letters women continued sending me from all over the country. One letter came from a 74-year-old widow whose grandson stole thousands from her retirement account. Another from a woman whose adult son manipulated her into signing over property rights. Many of them wrote the same sentence in different ways. I thought nobody would believe me. That sentence haunted me. Because predators thrive where silence exists. I spent years believing strength meant enduring pain quietly. Now I understand strength differently. Strength is speaking even when your voice shakes. Strength is setting boundaries even with people you love. Strength is understanding that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. Some people deserve compassion from a distance. Ryan taught me that. And strangely enough, I no longer hated him. Hatred chains you to people emotionally. I didn't want to carry him anymore. What I felt instead was sadness. Sadness that greed consumed him. Sadness that pride mattered more to him than love. Sadness that Noah would grow up remembering his father through courtroom visits and whispered adult conversations. But sadness is different from surrender. I could release hatred without excusing harm. That distinction changed my life. Late that night, I stepped onto the back porch one final time before bed. The marshlands shimmered beneath moonlight, while warm South Carolina air wrapped softly around me. For the first time in years, I felt entirely safe inside my own home. Not because danger no longer existed in the world, because I finally trusted myself again. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside all this pain. Sometimes people will betray you. Sometimes the people closest to you will mistake your kindness for weakness. Sometimes survival will require painful choices you never imagined making. But no amount of money is worth sacrificing your dignity, your safety, or your voice. Not for family, not for love, not for anyone. And if someone ever tries to make you feel small so they can control you, don't forget this. The moment you stop being afraid of them is the moment they begin losing power over you. After everything I survived, I learned that betrayal hurts most when it comes from the people you once trusted with your heart. I spent years believing that keeping peace inside the family was more important than confronting uncomfortable truths. Like many women of my generation, I was taught to stay patient, forgiving, and understanding no matter how badly someone behaves. But silence can become dangerous when it protects cruelty instead of love. What happened with Ryan taught me that financial abuse often begins quietly. It It starts with small questions, small pressures, and subtle attempts to make someone doubt themselves. Over time, manipulation grows until fear replaces trust. And sadly, many older women experience this without realizing they deserve protection too. But I also learned something beautiful. Through all the pain, surviving betrayal can rebuild your strength in ways you never expected. Claire found her voice again. Noah found safety again. And I rediscovered something I thought I had lost after Walter died: peace. Real healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from reclaiming your dignity, your boundaries, and your ability to trust yourself again. If you take anything from my story, let it be. This love should never require you to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Anyone who truly loves you will protect your spirit, not break it down for control, money, or power. And if you've ever gone through betrayal, manipulation, or family heartbreak, please know this: you are not weak for surviving it. Sometimes surviving is the bravest thing a person can do. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set painful boundaries with someone you loved? And where are you watching from today? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for more emotional family dramas and life stories.